She was 18 years old and had $400 and no one to go home to. No family she could count on. No address that was hers. Just a bottom bunk at a shelter on Church Street. A part-time job at a grocery store that paid just enough not to. And $1 she brought to a county auction on a cold Thursday in November. And with that dollar, she bought a stone cottage on the Maine coast. A 2-room building from 1840 on 3/4 of an acre. Its roof sound and its walls 2 feet of quarried granite. Its wide hearth cold for 11 years and the root cellar door locked. The county surplus officer told her the plumbing hadn't worked since 2012. He said it as a warning. But what no one in that auction room knew, what no one had known since a schoolteacher named Agnes Pell died alone in that cottage 11 years before, was that beneath the hearthstone in the front room, something had been waiting. Placed there carefully. Left for exactly the kind of person who would arrive with $1 and no other options, and the particular stubbornness to lift a stone. If stories like this are the reason you come here, please subscribe. It means more than I can say. And leave me a comment with where in the world you're watching from. I read every one. Now, back to Iris. Her mother's name was Diana Vane, and she had raised Iris alone in a small city in western Maine, working a hotel housekeeping job that kept things manageable most months and difficult in the rest. She was a woman of moods, not unstable but tidal, swinging between stretches of warmth and energy and stretches of flatness that Iris had learned, by the time she was 10, to navigate carefully. She could tell by Tuesday what the rest of the week was going to be. She had learned to cook early, because the flat weeks were the weeks when dinner didn't happen otherwise. She had learned to read the weather of her mother's face the way farmers read the sky. Diana loved Iris. That was never in question. In the good stretches, she was a woman who laughed easily and remembered the specific details of people's lives. What they worried about, what they were trying, what they'd told her in passing 2 months ago, and who brought this quality home. Remembering Iris's tests and tryouts and small disasters with a care that felt, when it was present, like being genuinely seen. She cooked well when she cooked. She made celebrations out of ordinary things, a good report card, the first warm day of April, the finding of a good parking spot, with the particular intensity of someone who understands that joy requires active manufacturing. On the good weeks, she was the kind of mother who made Iris feel that being her daughter was a specific and fortunate thing to be. Iris had grown up understanding both of these things, that she was loved, and that the person who loved her was not always able to be what Iris needed. Both were true. They did not cancel each other out. The first hospitalization came when Iris was 16. She had seen it coming for months. The flatness that spring had been different from the ordinary flatness, quieter and deeper. And then the weeks when Diana did not get out of bed except to use the bathroom, and the week when she barely did that. Iris called the doctor on a Tuesday. The doctor called an ambulance on a Wednesday. Diana came home 8 weeks later, thinner and steadier, on a medication that helped. The caseworker who handled Iris's temporary placement with a foster family was kind and efficient and explained, clearly, that these were emergency provisions only and that the goal was reunification at the soonest reasonable point. Reunification happened. Diana came home. The next year was better. Mostly, Iris stayed close. She worked at the grocery store on weekends and saved every dollar she didn't need to spend, because she understood, in the wordless way that children of fragile parents understand things, that a reserve was not optional. The second hospitalization came in October of the year Iris turned 17. Longer this time. Harder, Diana had stopped taking her medication in August. She had done it quietly, on her own, for reasons she later couldn't explain clearly. By October, the bottom had come back, deeper than before, And this time, the caseworker said, gently but plainly, that Diana's recovery timeline was uncertain and that a more stable arrangement for Iris was advisable. Diana's sister lived in Connecticut. Diana's sister had 3 children and a 4-bedroom house and a husband who worked in insurance. She could not take Iris. She explained this on the phone to the caseworker, and Iris was in the room when the call was made, and she heard the explanation. It was reasonable. It was careful. It made sense. And she understood it. And she did not forgive it. Because understanding and forgiving are 2 different things, and she was 17. Her mother's sister-in-law, her Aunt Donna, technically her father's brother's wife, a woman she barely knew, offered. She had a spare room. She lived 40 minutes away in a town called Farwell. She was a decent woman, doing a decent thing, and Iris was grateful for it. And she did not pretend the gratitude was more than it was. She lived with Donna for 14 months. She finished her senior year in Farwell. She graduated. She kept working, different grocery store now but the same kind of job, and she kept saving. Donna's household was warm enough. There was food and quiet, and a room with a lock that was hers. But she was a guest. She had always been a guest. She set her things in the room carefully, as if she might need to gather them quickly. A month after her 18th birthday, Donna sat her down at the kitchen table. "I think you're ready," Donna said. She had an envelope. She slid it across the table. $200. A note inside that said, "I'll always be there if you need anything," in Donna's handwriting, with a little heart drawn at the bottom that cost Iris something to look at. Donna was not a bad woman. She had done what she could. But "I think you're ready" was not true, and they both knew it was not true. And the envelope was a door being gently and firmly closed, and Iris walked through it because there was nothing else to do. She was at the shelter on Church Street within a week. The shelter had 30 beds and a curfew of 9, and a case manager named Ron who was overworked and thorough, and who told Iris, on their first meeting, that the goal was stable housing within 90 days. Ron had the particular careful optimism of someone who has seen things go wrong many ways and still chooses to believe in the 90 days. Iris appreciated this. She was not sure she believed in them herself. She found the listing on a flyer pinned to the resource board in the shelter's common room. County of Aldwych surplus property auction, scheduled for Thursday, November 14th. Among the listed parcels, Lot 7, Gull Point Road. Stone Cottage, Hope 8 acres, circa 1840. Tax delinquent since 2013. Last assessed at $38,000 in 2011. Current county liability. Minimum bid, $1. Winning bidder assumes tax liability and all code compliance obligations within 24 months of transfer. She called the number on the flyer. The man who answered was Ray Cobb, the county surplus property officer, a man of 57 who had been handling county surplus sales for 19 years and had distinct ideas about who was a serious bidder and who was wasting everyone's time. He listened to her questions. He answered them accurately. He said, at the end, "You understand that tax liability transfers immediately?" "Yes," she said. "And you have a plan for the code compliance?" She said she was working on it. He was quiet for a moment. "Come look at the property," he said. "Then decide." She drove out on a Saturday morning in her car, a 2001 Civic with 200,000 miles and a reliable engine, and turned onto Gull Point Road, which ran along the back side of a rise above the harbor. The cottage appeared around a bend. She stopped the car and looked at it. Stone. That was the first thing. Not stone veneer over frame construction, but actual quarried granite walls, 2 feet thick. The blocks fitted with the irregular precision of handwork. Not machine cut, not uniform, just well-chosen stones, placed by someone who had done it before and done it to last. The mortar between the courses had cracked and needed attention in places, but the walls themselves were as solid as the ridge they sat against. The roof was newer than the walls, replaced sometime in the 90s, based on the shingle color, and it looked sound. 2 windows flanking the front door, both intact. A chimney of the same granite rising from the north end. 2 feet of moss on the north-facing side, which was not rot but decades of damp growing into stone, which was a different thing. The door was unlocked. Ray Cobb had given her the code to the lockbox with the key, and she'd opened it in the parking lot of the county office on her way out. She unlocked the front door and stepped inside. The smell was wood ash and cold stone, and something underneath both of those. The faint, sweet, stale smell of a house that had been lived in by the same person for a long time, and then not lived in at all. The front room was the full width of the cottage, with the wide hearth taking up most of the north wall. A hearthstone of flat granite ran the full length of the fireplace opening, 6 feet wide and 18 inches deep. A single continuous slab of pale gray stone. Above it, a mantelpiece of painted pine, chipped now. A small oval mirror still hanging from a hook above it that showed Iris her own face back at her, dusty and surprised. She stood in the front room for a while. A pair of reading glasses sat on the windowsill to the left of the hearth, folded, beside a half-finished crossword puzzle torn from a newspaper she couldn't date. 11 years. They had been there 11 years. She did not touch them. She looked at the hearth. The wood floor was wide plank pine, gapped, and dusty, but not buckled. The 2 windows let in the November light at a low angle that made the room feel larger than it was. Through the back window she could see the overgrown kitchen garden, a tangle of dried stalks and rose briars that had not been managed in a decade but had not died, the bones of it still visible, the order still there beneath the years of growth. She went through the back room. Kitchen alcove. A root cellar door set into the stone floor, fitted with a padlock that was rusted solid. She tried her key on it. Wrong key. The root cellar had its own lock, and whatever key belonged to it was not on the ring Ray Cobb had given her. She stood in the kitchen for a moment. She looked at the root cellar door. Then she went back to the front room and stood at the hearth again. She was in that room for 20 minutes before she made up her mind. She called Ray Cobb from the parking lot. "I'd like to bid," she said. He was quiet for a moment. "It's a lot of work," he said. "I know." Another pause. "All right," he said. Thursday at 10. She was the only bidder. $1. Ray Cobb wrote it into the transfer record without expression, though she thought she saw something shift briefly in his face. Not quite approval, but the precursor to it. She drove back to the shelter and told Ron, who said, "Now you need a contractor and a lawyer, in that order." She found Tom Vickers through a flyer on the feed store bulletin board in the village of Gull Point, which was the nearest populated place to the cottage. 40 houses, a post office, a store, a small harbor. Tom was 65 and had been doing stonework in the county since he was 19, and he came out to the cottage the following Tuesday morning and walked the exterior in a deliberate circuit, pressing the mortar joints at intervals, tapping stones with his knuckle, crouching at the foundation line to look at the drainage grade. When he was done, he told her what it would cost to repoint the exterior mortar and rebuild the chimney flashing and reset 2 foundation stones on the north side that had moved slightly and wanted to move more. She asked if he could start with the interior. He came inside and looked at the hearth. He ran his thumb along the mortar between the hearthstones, moving slowly from left to right. He stopped at the center stone. He pressed the joint with his thumbnail. He looked at the stone. He crouched down and looked more carefully at the edges. "This one's not original," he said. She came over. Different granite, Tom said. You can see the colors lighter. And look here, the joint's not mortared. He ran his finger along the seam. It's sitting in a channel. Cut for it. He looked up at her. Somebody put this stone in deliberately, after the original hearth was laid. Could have been 20 years ago. Could have been 50. She looked at the stone. Then at him. Then at the stone again. What happens if I lift it? She said. Tom thought about this. Probably nothing, he said. Or something. She put both hands flat on the hearthstone. It was cold, cold the way stone is cold when it has been sealed away from warmth for a long time. She pressed down, then shifted her grip to the far edge and pulled. The stone moved. It was heavy, perhaps 80 pounds, and it moved with the slow, grating certainty of something that had not been moved in a very long time, but had always been meant to be lifted. She set it on the floor beside the hearth. Beneath it was a cavity, roughly 18 inches square and 8 inches deep, cut into the subfloor. And in the cavity, a metal box, dark green, the kind designed to be fireproof, with a latch on the front. Tom stood very still. If you've been with this story as long as I think you have, please subscribe right now if you haven't already. What Iris found in that box is the reason this story matters. And I want you here when it arrives. The latch was stiff. She worked it with both thumbs until it gave. Inside the box, 4 things. The first was the cottage's original deed, dated 1840, and below it the deed of Agnes Pell's purchase in 1974, the year she bought the cottage at 41 years old, unmarried, a school teacher, paying $4,200 cash. The deed bore the county recorder's stamp. Clear title, no liens, no encumbrances. It was hers. And now, it was Iris's. The second was a document from Gull Point Savings Bank, dated 1991, the terms of a private trust Agnes had established, called simply the Cottage Trust, with an initial deposit of $9,000, to be maintained and grown by the bank in perpetuity until claimed by the legal owner of the cottage property. The document listed the account number and the name of the account manager. Iris stared at the account number for a moment. She folded the document carefully and put it in her jacket pocket. The third was a small brass key on a cord, with a tag attached in Agnes's handwriting, root cellar. The fourth was a letter. Agnes Pell's handwriting was the handwriting of a school teacher who had written on blackboards for 38 years. Clear, upright, no flourish, nothing wasted. The letter was 4 paragraphs. She said she had taught school in Aldwych County from 1956 to 1994 and had bought this cottage because it was the only thing she could afford that was entirely hers. And she had loved it for the 40 years she lived in it, and expected to love it until she stopped. She said she had no family left who wanted the cottage, and had not been willing to leave it to the county or to chance. She said the cottage trust had been her solution, a reserve that would transfer only to the legal owner who found this box, because whoever found it was whoever cared enough to look. She said the root cellar contained things she could not bring herself to part with during her lifetime, but had no wish to have scattered or lost. She asked only that they be treated with respect. At the bottom of the letter, in a slightly different ink, added later, she thought. At some point after the letter was written, I made bread every week for 40 years. I left a loaf on the stone post at the road every Sunday. For whoever, I hope someone does it after me. Tom Vickers read the letter when Iris handed it to him, not speaking. He set it down on the hearthstone. He said, "The root cellar key was in there?" "Yes," she said. "You want me to come with you?" "Please," she said. The root cellar door opened with a sound of rust releasing, a low complaint of old iron that had been holding the same position for 11 years. The stairs were stone, 6 of them, worn smooth in the center from 40 years of someone going up and down for preserves, for root vegetables, for whatever the cellar had been keeping. The space below was small, 10 feet by 12 perhaps, with stone walls and a low ceiling and the cool, still air of a place that has been sealed long enough to find its own temperature and hold it. She had to duck slightly at the base of the stairs. Tom, taller, ducked more. The smell was earth and something herbal, not damp. Remarkably dry. The ventilation grooves Agnes had cut into the base of the ceiling, Iris would realize later, had been keeping the air circulating for 11 years without anyone maintaining them. The woman had built her cellar the way she had built her life, with an eye for what would last. On the shelves along the east wall, the 12 notebooks, cloth covered in 4 different colors, organized in a system Iris would spend days understanding. She counted them quickly. Then she opened the nearest one, standing in the cellar light with Tom at her shoulder, and read the first page. Autumn Preserves and Considerations. The handwriting was Agnes's, smaller in these notebooks than in the letter. The first recipe was for beach plum jam, dated to September 1958, the year Agnes would have been 25. Below it, in different ink, a note. Mama's version used less sugar, but I find the fruit bitter without it. Below that, in a third ink from yet another year, the beach plum hedge is thinner now. Plant more in the spring. 60 years of accumulated thought in 3 colors of ink across 12 volumes. Iris closed the notebook carefully. On the bottom shelf, wrapped in cloth, the 6 framed botanical watercolors. Agnes had painted them herself, small, exact, warm, the plants from her kitchen garden, chamomile, thyme, wild garlic, sea lavender, 3 varieties of heirloom tomato, signed in the lower right corner, each one, in a hand smaller than her letter-writing hand. Not the work of a trained painter, but of a precise observer who had spent 40 years looking at the same garden through all its seasons. In the back corner of the cellar, in a tin that had once held shortbread, 8 gold coins, pre-1933. Each one in a paper sleeve. She recognized the type from a photograph she'd seen somewhere, Liberty Head double eagles. She did not know their value. She would find out. She sat on the cellar steps for a while. Tom stood at the base of the stairs. Neither of them said anything. There was nothing that needed saying yet. Margaret Holt lived in the nearest house to the cottage, a quarter-mile down Gull Point Road, a white cape, with a garden that ran all the way to the stone wall along the road. She was 80 years old and had lived in that house for 53 years, which meant she had watched Agnes Pell's lights through the kitchen window for 37 of those years, and had known her in the way that close neighbors know each other in remote places. Completely. She came to introduce herself on Iris's 4th day at the cottage, arriving with a covered dish and the directness of someone who has lived long enough to know that waiting to introduce yourself is usually a mistake. She talked about Agnes for an hour over the covered dish, which was a fish chowder that Iris ate 2 bowls of while Margaret talked. Agnes had been private, but not cold. She had loved the garden and the kitchen and the view from the front room window on clear days, when you could see the harbor and, beyond it, the open water. She had made bread every week of her adult life. Every Sunday morning she left a loaf on the stone post at the road, the old field boundary post, granite, at the end of the cottage's property line, and by Sunday afternoon it was always gone. For whoever, Margaret said. That's what she'd say, if you thanked her, for whoever needed it. She said the tradition had stopped when Agnes died. The post was still there. Iris looked out the front window at the road. She said she left a note in the box about the bread. Margaret set down her spoon. She left a note? She said she hoped someone would do it after her. Margaret was quiet for a moment. Well, she said, The Gull Point Savings Bank confirmed the Cottage trust balance in December. It had grown from $9,000 in 1991 to $16,400, 33 years of quiet accumulation at the conservative interest rates of a small bank that had been doing business in the same building since 1907. Iris cried briefly in the bank's parking lot, by herself, before she drove back to the cottage. Not because the money was so large, it wasn't. Not compared to some things, but because of the precision of it. Agnes had thought ahead with an accountant's clarity and a teacher's patience, setting aside something for a person she would never meet, trusting it would still be there. The Liberty Head coins went to a coin dealer in Portland who was honest about their value and conservative in his appraisal. $12,400 for the 8, based on gold weight and numismatic condition. She kept 2 and sold 6. The 2 she kept she put in the tin, which she put on the mantelpiece. The botanical watercolors went to a gallery in the nearby town of Harrow, whose owner, a woman named Frances Beale, who had been selling local art for 20 years, said Agnes's work was better than she'd expected, and priced the 6 pieces collectively at $3,800. Frances said she thought they'd sell. She was right. They sold in 6 weeks, to 4 different buyers, 2 of them local and 2 from away. The recipe notebooks were what surprised everyone most. A food writer named Carol Strout, who lived in Portland and wrote about Maine culinary history, came to the cottage in January after hearing about them from Frances, who had told someone who had told Carol. Carol sat with the notebooks for 3 hours, asking Iris's permission before she turned each page, and when she was done she said, very quietly, that this was an unusual thing. 60 years of continuous household culinary record, annotated through 4 generations of one family's knowledge, specific to a particular place and soil and season. She asked if Iris would consider a collaboration, a book, or a series of pieces. She said the notebooks should be preserved and shared, and that she knew a way to do both. They were still working out the details in spring. The arrangement would take time. That was all right. The bread was what the village noticed first. She had been baking since January, using Agnes's notebooks, working through the bread section in the order Agnes had organized it, which was by season and occasion. She started with the plain white sandwich loaf, and moved to the oatmeal and then to the molasses brown, and by February she understood what she was doing well enough to sell at the Gull Point Winter Market, which ran on Saturday mornings in the fire station from November through April. The first Saturday she brought 4 loaves and sold 3. The 4th she brought home and gave to Margaret, who ate a slice at the kitchen table with her coat still on and said, "She used more salt than this." Iris went back to the notebook. Agnes's note, in the margin, "half a teaspoon more salt than you think is right." She'd underlined it. The next Saturday, she brought 6 loaves. They were gone by 10:30. Ray Cobb bought one. He said nothing about it, just put it under his arm and paid, but he came back the following Saturday and bought another. And the one after that, and eventually he told her, not as a compliment, but as a statement of fact, that it was the best oatmeal bread he'd had since his mother died. She thanked him. He nodded once and said nothing more. That was Ray Cobb's version of a warm welcome, and she understood it as such. On the first Sunday of March, she baked an extra loaf, the oatmeal, which was Agnes's Sunday bread, and walked it out to the stone post at the end of the property and set it on top in a cloth bag. She walked back to the cottage. She went inside. By 2 o'clock, the bread was gone. She never saw who took it. She didn't need to. The call from her mother came in April. Diana was still at her own sister's house in Connecticut, stabilized now on a different medication regimen, talking to a counselor twice a week. She had heard from Donna, who had heard from someone in Farwell, who had seen something online about the cottage and the bread and the woman who baked it. Diana cried on the phone. She said she was sorry. She said it more than once. She said she didn't know Iris had. She started sentences and didn't finish them. Iris said, "I'm all right, Mom." She said it plainly. She meant it entirely. She meant more by it than her mother had asked. She meant that she had found something and it was hers, and the finding had been her own, and that she was all right in the specific way of someone who has arrived somewhere, rather than simply survived somewhere. Her mother understood the difference. Mothers usually do. There was a long silence on the line. Then Diana said, "Your grandmother used to bake bread." "I know," Iris said. "I'll send you a loaf." She did. The things kept closest to the hearth are the things trusted most. Agnes Pell had spent 40 years in a 2-room granite cottage, teaching school and baking bread and painting the herbs from her kitchen garden with a small watercolor brush, and writing down everything she knew about food and season and the particular soil of that 3/4 of an acre on Gull Point Road. She had not been famous. She had not been rich. She had been precise and patient, and she had understood, in the way that some people understand the things most worth understanding, that what you leave behind is not always what anyone thinks to look for, and that the right person, given enough time and enough quiet, eventually looks. She had left the reading glasses on the windowsill and the crossword on the sill beside them, and the hearthstone in its channel, and the root cellar key in the box, and the bread tradition on a stone post at the road. And she had trusted all of it to the same future she couldn't see. It had arrived. She had been 18 years old with $400 and no one to go home to. She had found, beneath the hearthstone she almost hadn't lifted, that she had been wrong about the last part. The cottage had been waiting. The bread was proof. The stone post at the road, with its cloth bag and its empty space by Sunday afternoon, was proof. Something had recognized her. And she had, with time and with work and with a stonemason's offhand observation on an ordinary Tuesday, finally recognized it back. If this story found you at the right moment today, please subscribe and share it with someone who needs to hear it. And tell me in the comments, did someone ever leave something behind for you? A recipe, a letter, a small object that told you more about who they were than anything they said while they were living? I would genuinely love to hear. See you in the next one.